We're seeing mayors and governors exerting their authority over the bodies that live within their jurisdictions. Definitely, governors are starting to stand up to the federal government. We're also seeing it at the city level. As this starts to come to more of a head in the cities that have declared themselves sanctuary cities, whether they allow ICE to operate within their borders, whether the National Guard from different states are being deployed and allowed within the cities, whether we have federal troops moving in on buildings within cities. This is the kind of stuff that's on my mind right now, Lucas. How does this relate to habeas corpus? Like, that's something that comes up, and I don't think a lot of us understand that or how this intersects with the whole idea of sanctuary cities.
Habeas corpus is this notion. It's Latin, have body. It goes to the notion of who controls bodies, and it's fundamental to understand who controls bodies for us to understand the relationship between cities, counties, uh, states, and the federal government. And in my mind, I'm often thinking, oh, what does a city control? It controls the real estate. It controls the fixed buildings within the city limits. The county controls the land, but the state is the level that controls bodies. And when we turn to the federal government, the reason that it's not a national government, national meaning control over those people who were born there, and the argument in the creation of the federal government, the first argument being over whether it was to have control over the bodies, is the reason that we call it the federal government. And the federal government has used words like citizen, just like it has used later words like terrorist, and hate crime to try to exert control over bodies that reside in the various states. But one, we heard mention of the federal government and pushback against Trump's policies earlier in his term, whenever people were constantly pointing out, oh, the federal government cannot assume habeas corpus except in times of war and emergency. And Trump threatened. He said, "Oh well, we have insurrection going on in various cities and towns in America. We have all these problems. I can declare habeas corpus." Well, that hadn't happened yet, and whether or not Trump tries to do so, or that is a fight that happens in Washington D.C., remains to be seen.
Well,
But
but as we break this down, the different players in the game here. We have the governors in control of the states, we have sheriffs in control of the counties, and then we have mayors in control of the cities. To me, the way that this rolls, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like the governors are really the important player because the governor is in control of the resources of the entire state. Well, as you get smaller and smaller, you might have a very populous county, you might have a very populous city, but they don't have the real power boots on the ground unless they've been amassing military equipment, which we've seen. I mean, definitely some sheriff's departments in some counties have been buying up military equipment, so they have the ability to marshal a pretty significant force if they want to. I don't know that that's happening at the city level, or maybe it's just not happening in my city. I don't even know where they store gear like that, but definitely the sheriffs, since they have such a large county area, they've got buildings and they've got area that they can put all kinds of crazy military equipment they've been buying up off the secondary market.
apart from the tools that these different law enforcement bodies have, I think the formation of them is also going to be very important into how that plays out. Sheriffs are elected. Uh, they deputize people. They deputize, what we call sheriff's deputies. And part of the understanding of that system is they get to take the law into their minds and make decisions as to how to enforce the law. Nobody tells them what to do. A mayor tells a police force what to do. They can give the police force quotas. Now, whether the police force is aligned with the political body, the town council and the mayor, I think that might be part of it. But a governor, who do they have? They have what, state troopers. state troopers whose jurisdiction is traffic on the roads, and then the National Guard. So one, we do see the governors vying for control of the National Guard, but I think maybe what's more important than trying to game out um, who's going to be jockeying for that power, and how those conflicts are going to happen, and if they are going to happen with federal troops or with extra state militias that are called into your state. I think what will be a wiser play is for the mayors and the governors to begin to talk about the duty to protect that comes. That's the real power uh, behind their government. And so, when we think about habeas corpus, a lot of time it's with some notion of the producing the body of somebody who's been charged with a crime. And we think about the power of the government as regards to tax. But if we just relied on government to come knock on our door and rifle through our pockets and take our money away, nobody would be for government. But if we begin to think about the government has a duty to protect, and that's what we really like about our governments. Whenever we have a politician that comes around and says, "Hey, there are masked men in some sort of strange outfit. It looks like military fatigues, but they're not military. They say they're from the federal government, but the federal government doesn't have control of habeas corpus. We need to protect our citizens and or protect the people within the country. Oh, and we've declared these people worthy of our protection." That's going to be a shift that gets us away from this narrative of just clashes between our various levels of government. And when Donald Trump tweeted or truthed at Governor Pritzker in Illinois recently that he was concerned about the ICE officers' safety inside Chicago. I thought to myself, well, if I was the governor of Chicago, I would take them into custody for their safety, because those are bodies within your state right now, and you can take them into jail if you're so against, if well, whatever the calculation is. The government has a duty to protect the bodies. And so I think that's where we're going to see part of this breakout. And there's also going to be a legislative movement to again to move from this notion of sanctuary cities or jurisdictions of sanctuary, places of sanctuary, and say, oh no, our power is over bodies, and these are the bodies that we want to protect. And again, that sounds a little bit like citizenship, or this movement to terrorist, anti-citizenship of terrorist. But I think we're going to see that at least at the state level, maybe at the city level.
Well, it brings up a good point, because we have been somewhat in recent episodes and been kicking around this idea of what it means to be a citizen of the United States, and that you're live within a state and the state has control over you. Is it that far of a stretch to say that the state has the ability to decide who is a citizen of that state? I mean, certainly we're seeing some expression of that when states are extending benefits or giving housing or doing other types of things that would traditionally only be given to citizens of a certain territory. So that has already been occurring. Is it that far of a stretch for a governor to say, nope, we're actually going to go one step further here. We're going to actually make these people citizens of our state? And does that confer that they're actually citizens of the United States in a federal sense?
Yeah, and this notion of citizenship to the United States doesn't come until, oh wait, after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment, 1868. They tried to do it with the 13th Amendment, and that confers a dual citizenship. But again, when that amendment passed, was there any talk about taking the writ of habeas corpus out of the hands of the state? No, we never hear anything about that. And so, regardless of the arguments that have been made in courts by lawyers and affirmed by judges and whomever in the past, um, there has been no change in our constitutions as to who has this duty to protect bodies. So we might invent different words than citizenship or terrorist, but I do think that we are going to see, especially states, reaching out to protect the bodies within their state. Now,
Well, let me jump in here for a second because I think this is another one of those bellwethers for what to look for as we start to see these fundamental disagreements between the federal government and the states play out. This is another important one. So another one that comes to mind, I think that is one. So it's funding. When we see states start to fundamentally disagree with the federal government and withhold funding, or they start to operate in a way where they are controlling who is and who is not a citizen of that state, regarded to the types of benefits and the things that are extended to people that live within the border. This is where we're starting to see the breakdown of this idea that that all of the states are acting in concert and that the federal government was overseeing that and coordinating it. And now we have the states acting independently, like the territorial distinctions, like countries, in the sense that European countries do. I think that's what we're starting to see here in America, is that we're no longer going to have this unified country and that we're going to have states acting like countries. So this, I think, is one we got to pay close attention to.
yeah, and I think you mentioned the states withholding funding, which is so interesting to think about how that sword is going to twist in the federal government's hand. How have sanctions twisted in the federal government's hands after spreading their monetary system to the other countries of the world? Worked all well and good whenever they were passing them out like carrots, but whenever they began to brandish the carrot like a sword, it cut their own hand. And likewise, when Donald Trump brags that he's going to uh, direct the Department of Justice to prosecute the flag burning in the United States, that's a lot of bragging, but there's not a lot to back that up. Where does the federal government have their jurisdiction? They own property, they own real property, and they have reserved tracts of land in which they have the option to place property in the various states. But apart from that, the only place that they hold the national powers or habeas corpus is within the District of Columbia. That's why it's not a state. And and so whenever I see Donald Trump make those statements, I always like remind myself, or whenever I see any member of Congress, senator or representative, talking about what they're going to do to enact change in the United States, we have to remind ourselves the only real power that they get together to make resolutions. They call them bills, but they're resolutions. And the question are they resolved to a certain threshold, a majority or 2/3 or whatever it may be. And the only real resolutions that mean anything are those that resolve to send a bill to the Treasury. And just like it is with passing out carrots to the various countries around the world, it's the same with the states. Works well whenever they're passing out money to the states, but whenever they begin to deny funding to the state, that begins to break down.
Well,
And
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 this
so
will be interesting for the blue states, which are almost universally are considered donor states, meaning that they provide more funding to the federal government than they get back. If the blue states started to withhold funding to the federal government and just say, you know what, we don't care, we don't want your money anymore, we don't want the control, we don't want to operate in this fashion, um, they would actually have a budget surplus. So the only place that would start to break down is if for the common defense of these United States. I mean, am I wrong on this one? Like, where else would we really see the impact except if the states didn't have the ability to coordinate between themselves among interstate commerce? I mean, that's what the federal constitution was supposed to be doing and limited to.
Well, I think they'll still provide for the common defense, but that's going to be counted in terms of numbers of soldiers and support that they give. No, you're absolutely right. Where else does that centralization break down though? EDNY and SDNY, New York City. Where is the financial center of the United States? What about incorporations? How come all these incorporations that exist in the various states are incorporated through the tiny state of Delaware? I think
Yeah,
we're
but
beginning.
we've covered that. Like the states control that. You have to do a foreign entity registration anytime you want to do business. So even if you're declared in Delaware, you still, if you want to do business in the state of California or Texas or the state of Minnesota or whatever, you have to do a foreign entity registration. Your corporation is then shadowed into that other state, and you are bound by the rules inside that state as if you were incorporated within that state. So it just gives you like a placeholder. It's like a way to say, here's my first pinning of my company, and then I now create little shadow companies in each of the states I do business in.
Well, I think because I'm hearkening to this pushback to Citizens United through the control of corporations. So as people gain awareness of the control that the states can exert over corporations, what is the importance of being in Delaware going, or being starting a corporation registered in Delaware going to be? And if that also stretches to what the expectations of the taxes on the corporations are going to be, and they can no longer be choosing the optimized lowest taxing entity to register their
No, no, hold on.
corporation
That's
in.
not, no, no, no. Hold on. Let me clarify that. So the reason a lot of companies declare in Delaware is because it provides for a common venue for the base of if there were some kind of a dispute at the main corporate level. So if you have to do something with the board of directors or with the way that the company is being run, Delaware has a set of rules that is been normalized so that if you're taking investment from, like, say, a venture capitalist, or if you're taking money from certain other types of entities, that there is a common set of precedences and jurisdictions on how to proceed. If you don't have that, it's not that you can't do it, it's just that it's a lot harder to get through. A lot of companies were declaring as Wyoming companies because they were crypto friendly and whatever. So there was a big push for that to be the base place that many companies were formed. But then they found when they tried to solicit for investment that the distinctions between the laws were enough that they weren't willing to shoulder the cost. So they said, well, if you were to redeclare your company in Delaware and pin there, then you wouldn't incur those costs. So it's a cost saving measure, and it's a way to have a common set of rules so that you don't have these variations. But as soon as you start dealing with the state of California, so if you have employees there, if you have any sort of presence within the state of California, it doesn't matter if you're declared in Delaware. You still have to have a foreign entity registration in California, and whatever you do in California is governed under those rules of the California Shadow Corp copy that you created.
Okay, you're much more familiar with the rules of incorporations and why Delaware, why Wyoming. But let's not get stuck there. Let's talk about money and New York, because all of because part of the problem that we've had in the for quite some time in the history of America is a production of debt and no accountability for that production of debt. And this is also something that the federal administrations are being forced to grapple with as we cross the threshold into $38 trillion of debt. And who even knows or understands the magnitude of that number or what that means? So I think what it means most broadly is that is the power of the power of that monetary system, the creation of that debt begins to wane.
Well,
Um,
this is actually a good question. I don't know if we know the answer to this or if you do. Let's just say that the states somehow decided that they really weren't that interested in participating at the federal level anymore. Have they signed up for the debt? Like, did California say, "Well, yeah, we're on the hook for 1/50th of that"? Is that how it actually works? Like, can the states just nope out of that, or is that the Civil War there?
That I mean, that's a civil war right there. But it is interesting to think about, say, the case of Texas, and even the case you mentioned California. The United States fought a war uh, with Spain to gain the territory of California. The United States paid. Napoleon and the French government for the what we call the Louisiana Purchase. So states like Louisiana and etc. Um, the United States cut a deal with Texas to assume its war debts with Spain, and so part of the threat that was once bandied about before the Civil War was thought was, oh, Texas, if you're going to leave, we're going to place the burden of the debt that we assumed whenever you joined us back on your shoulders, and then we're going to demand you pay it back. And if you can't pay it back, then that gives us reason to come fight a war with you. So
Well, with inflation though, that might not look that hard to do anymore, right? I mean, maybe back in the day that would have been an insurmountable thing, but the way that the dollar's been debased and devalued, and we're no longer bound to the gold standard, unless those debts were priced in gold, the states probably could handle that. California could probably buy its way back if it wanted to, if it were on the hook for those war debts.
Well, and I think this is where we're coming into a very new understanding of what underpins money, and in part, um, I think the Trump administration has planned to dial it back to gold and silver at one point, but that's not the answer, and that's not where they want to land. And more broadly across the world, this is why we talk about commodity swap agreements and beginning to think about the strength of an economy, not as being something that you measure in dollars that you denominate and hand out to them so that you can extract the resources and the production capacity uh, of that state. Instead, we're going to start saying, "Oh, how strong is your money, and how strong is it compared to what the per capita income? What's the how hard are people working in your state, and how what is the value of the resources that exist within your state as compared to how many or how available they are, and how easily to extract in the rest of the world. That's going to look very different than just a group of people getting together in some stone building and writing bills to the treasury, creating debt and selling that debt. Um, so, but going also to your question, can the state step away? Lincoln called called the Civil War based on the perpetual union. He said we are in a perpetual union. Um, I don't know if states can back out, but if they can inflate or have some control over their own money, it will take the process that goes on in Washington, again, with the creation of debt and the broken feedback of who pays for that debt, the broken feedback loop of who pays for that debt. It will begin to address that, and I think that we've come to a point where it's unavoidable to address that problem.
As that debt starts to look insurmountable, I don't think it's realistic to say we're just going to take the current national debt and divide it by the number of citizens, and every single one of you is suddenly on the hook for this. I don't think that's how this plays out, honestly. I mean, we may have fought a civil war about an issue in the past, but as this debt starts to look insurmountable, I think some of the states are going to look at that and be like, you know what? We didn't really sign up for this. We don't agree with these policies. We don't know what is going on anymore. And this doesn't look like something we want. And I don't see that there is going to be a strong coalition to say, let's keep this thing together. It might be that at this point, the red states just fundamentally are like, well, yeah, we actually don't want to be partnered up with you. There might not be a desire to keep the union together this time.
I don't know. I think if you play it right, then actually the debt becomes a unifying uh, phenomenon. And so I think that the Trump administration has thought about that, and so has not been dismayed by foreign states and foreign companies, foreign interest shedding the amount of United States debt that they hold. So because if the United States owes all of its debt to itself, then coming out of printing off the debt and paying it off and starting anew is a forgiveness that they give to themselves, and not something that they have to expect or fight with foreign entities for in the future. And and I think that is coming. There's been the Trump administration's purchase of $40 billion in Argentine pesos. Some people say that's a bailout of Argentina. I thought, oh no, um, that's taking into hand a lot of somebody else's currency before you devalue your own currency, and without purchasing. Well, anyway, we've gone far afield of sovereignty, and I need to keep it short.
Only to the extent that sovereignty somewhat touches on how would the funding actually work, because the various states are still operating under the Federal Reserve System. That's what they're using. Certainly, we've seen some shots fired that there may be state currencies created, or that some states are thinking about whether they would actually want to have their own currency. So if we start to see that, that might be another bellwether for the breakdown of the entire system here. I could see one way to make a very common currency across all the states, and that would be just go straight back to using gold as the common standard. I mean, that's as easy as it gets. So then you don't have any kind of worry for this. And as far as your assertions on this is the way BRICS is directing things, well, maybe this is how things start to line up.
Well, I think the problem there is that is too minimalistic. And what we had in the past were many different currencies. If we go back to the pre-nationalization of the banking system, if we go back to the period of after Andrew Jackson and after the cancellation of the Second Bank of the United States, there were a lot of different private currencies. And apart from having to find a bank that you trusted, and also a bank that was large enough to carry that currency around, that system didn't seem to work so badly.
Well,
And
can
I think
the states charter their own banks? Is that something that the states have the power to do? I
the
imagine they
states
would.
used to have their own banks. It was after the creation of the National Banking Acts of 1863 and 1864 that assessed a massive tax on the state bank charters, and forced all of the banks into the federal banking system that would later get put under the monopolization of the Federal Reserve of gold and silver. This is part of the problem of gold and silver. But certainly the states did have their own charters. But apart from their own charters, there was also not this idea that you had to twist the arm and force every bank that was operating into the state currency. And so what we're going to see, I think, is a return to all of these different private monies that exist alongside some of the state currencies, federal and state currencies. And when I see the Genius Act, part of the Stable Genius Act that regulated stable coins, I wondered what was going on there, because it seemed like there was a move there to try to to try to force all of these stable coins into denomination under the dollar. And I didn't think that was necessarily right in an expectation of what the future is going to look like. Maybe there is a different play there. I don't know. But I don't think that you can put the cat back in the bag of different currencies between different people. And just in closing too, one way that I think about money also is as a like a manifestation of trust between two parties. And when we talk about trust that exists between two parties, there is the expectation on the government's level, but there are other places, and maybe deeper places, where we describe and build a social infrastructure for trust. And I'm thinking about religions. So when I think about money too, and the possibility for religions to begin to wield their own monies, I think that's going to be like probably the most stable of monies in the future. But anyway,
Yeah,
I don't know.
fascinating discussion. I think that this idea that cities and counties and states are exerting their own rules, potentially even extending this to the ideas of citizenship. This is stuff we need to keep a close eye on. How it ties in with money, that one I think we got to keep coming back to over and over. So to the extent that we touched on money, I kind of love it. We got to keep coming back to that.
Well, let me tell you just a little story that I think is fascinating to toss around in your mind. We have accounting standards today, and the accounting standards of today did not always exist. Most accountants are not aware of this. If you go read Murray Rothbard's History of Banking in the United States, he tells the story of the clash between the Rockefeller Syndicate and the J.P. Morgan Syndicate. And they were actually brought to heel. And this was at a time whenever the J.P. Morgan syndicate was worth, $200 million, Rockefeller $500 million. And the Mormon Church actually amassed a massive treasury over in Utah, and they had something like $100 million. And the treasurer of the Mormon Church called John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan, and he said, "Hey, you guys have your own unilateral systems that exist through the United States, and you play all sorts of accounting games, and it's not fair to Mormons who have an option of joining into either of your systems. So let's get together and let's have some fair accounting practices that you both agreed to abide by." And so when we begin to break apart, who makes the rules for money, and how nuanced and intricate and important the rules are, especially when it comes to accounting, that's always the story that I think back on, because we have this assumption that everyone plays by the same rules. It's not true, and we should ask ourselves how we got to that understanding. So I'll leave it there. Fun talk today.
All right, and we'll see you next time on FOMO.